Welcome to the Essential Tax Podcast with your host, Mishkin Santa. In each episode, we'll take the complex world of tax, all the jargon, acronyms, and stuff that make your eyes glaze over, and explain it in an impactful way to understand the complex and unknown areas. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, thewolfgroup.com. Now, here's the host of Essential Tax Podcast, Mishkin Santa.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Essential Tax Podcast. Today's topic is Malta. And Malta is super hot. And no, I'm not talking about the heat dome encompassing Europe right now. I was just in the southern France and northern Italy, and it was very hot. No, for Malta, what I'm talking about is their residency by investment program and the opportunities that are currently flowing through Malta to the rest of Europe. And I thought today I'd have a really special guest, Dr. Jean-Philippe, to come on and tell us all about it. I've got so many questions. In my trip to the south of France and northern Italy, we were standing in the customs line for US people, and my wife kind of gave me this look, and she said, if we only had a Malta passport, we could go over to the EU line and we'd get right through in 2 minutes. Look at me like I could be a potential customer here. But before we get started and get into the topics of Malta, Dr. Jean-Philippe, tell us about yourself, your background, your education, your firm, so the audience can kind of get to know who you are.
Great. Thank you, Mishkin. And thank you for having me on your show. You quite summed it up there. The access, the fast lane is always something that I personally experienced entering the US, and I'm lucky because with a Maltese passport, I also have the visa-free access to the US. So I'm a Maltese lawyer, tax advisor. For the last 25 years, I've gradually gravitated towards the mobility as a theme. A number of our clients have, given the international nature of our law firm's practice, we find ourselves dealing with many clients that are looking at Malta either as a hub or as maybe a destination sometimes, but increasingly as a conduit to other European countries. And mobility has taken a different meaning in the last part of my career, over the last 25 years, to the point that even our firm is, in a way, dominated by this theme of the mobility of assets and people.
Yeah, and in my practice, when people say what services do you provide, a lot of times I'll go into the diatribe of the different services and I'll talk about U.S. exit tax planning. But really, one that's really kind of taken off since the pandemic is just general outbound planning for U.S. people that, I think the name of the game, I think someone coined this phrase really well, which is how many passports can you collect? And I think that really came out of the pandemic because people were maybe landlocked in their country and they couldn't go anywhere. And people kind of, got a little, okay, well, I need to have options and need to be able to have more mobility. So it's not really about, in my opinion, the people giving up U.S. citizenship or green cards, that's one group of people. But I think the vast majority are just looking to kind of maintain what they have and then add more. So in that context, talk to me about Malta, because I've had advisors on here to tell me all about Italy, Portugal, Spain, I call them the big three. But tell us about Malta and tell us about the rising demand of the permanent residency by investment program.
Well, firstly, when we speak of a passport, we're referring to the concept of citizenship or nationality. And that's, of course, a much stronger immigration right, attachment to a country when compared to residency, which often just gives you the right to live there. Now, being a citizen of a country like Malta means you're a citizen of a wider union of 27 member states. And I would say Malta's positioning as the only country having a very open pro-immigration and, in fairness, pro-high net worth immigration, or let's say pro-entrepreneur immigration approach is leading to Malta being kind of the fastest entry point, not just if you wanted to live in Malta, but if you wanted to live in Italy, Portugal, Spain, France, and so on, and all 27 member states. So what's critical here is that with any citizenship of any one of the member states of Europe, you have all 27 in one, 27 passports rolled up into one. Now, Malta is that country that very selectively allows people to come completely new to the jurisdiction, people with maybe a success story from an entrepreneurial perspective, professional perspective, or even in academic life, and to propose a way in which they can help Malta achieve its national objectives as a tiny independent member state in the EU that has done very well for itself despite its size. And we are kind of trying to invite people of a certain mindset to join the ranks, right? And those people who are able to propose with some sort of exceptional contribution or even service are able to, within 2 years, naturalize as Maltese citizens in recognition for the proposed kind of project or somehow impact that they would be bringing to Malta. And that automatically enables them to then choose any one of the 27 member states to live in or simply spend time in or invest in, do business, and so on.
So if we were to look at just individuals that are coming to Malta, so what does Malta have to offer for just individuals coming inbound into Malta?
I'd say, basing on what I've just said about Malta being, in a way, a gateway to the whole of the EU, there's this optionality. So optionality is, I think, one of the key words that is increasingly being mentioned by the many families that come to us, still exploring a number of European jurisdictions, and then, zooming in on this tiny country that requires a lot of zooming in on Google Maps to find, which is giving them the pathway to actually, rather than choose one of the menu, choose that one country that gives them the whole menu in one.
Right.
What Americans particularly are looking for is increasingly this optionality of moving to a safe place and a very inclusive place that is, most importantly, English speaking. So the user friendliness of having a jurisdiction that is allowing you to fully kind of integrate with all the rights of citizenship or residency. We have a number of residency programs too. But in a language you understand that is already native to you.
Right.
Which also means you don't have a language test because Malta has English as its official language, not just a language.
I didn't know that. What about businesses? Is there any launch? Can businesses launch as well too from Malta? Use that as a conduit to operate in the EU, or?
Look, in the earlier years of my career, Malta had just joined the EU. So looking back 2004, when Malta joined the EU, one of the strongest points that we were working with as a law firm was the setting up of companies in Malta as a business passport to Europe. So having a company in Malta meant you could, with a European Maltese VAT number, VAT number, you could then trade internationally. On top of that, Malta still was allowed by the European Union to still offer very competitive tax rates for companies operating in Malta on an international level at 5% effective tax rate, which we're allowed to do because, first of all, our small size, but secondly, because we are very serious then in implementing all the anti-money laundering and transparency rules that one would expect on an international level. So Malta's been able to be kind of this small place where you can actually play the big game with favorable conditions, really.
Perfect. Talk to me about...
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead. No, please.
So in reality, the possibilities with setting up an entity in Malta, whether a holding company or a trading company or even a family trust, also reflects a bit our multicultural history, which when you look back, we have a very long history of being dominated by any superpower at any time in power, going from the Roman times, the Carthaginians, the Spanish, right up to the Knights of St. John, the French and the British. And then, we were colonized when we joined voluntarily the European Union, and that's our joke, really. So the whole interplay of cultures, even legal history. So we have a very strong Anglo-Saxon, so British legal foundation that has helped us a lot. So English speaking plus a law that is familiar in the English speaking world. And on top of that, a tax system that is also very understandable. So our res non-dom tax system is one of the, in a way, legacies left to us as an ex-British colony. The fact that Malta doesn't tax you on a citizenship basis or on a worldwide basis but taxes you only on income arising in Malta, and on your foreign income only if part of it is remitted here. So you can easily plan to be very tax efficient. For Americans, this means not creating double taxation that would be very complex and costly to then apply the double tax treaty.
No, absolutely. Sounds very interesting. Tell me about the Malta Citizenship by Investment Program, the one that's no longer available. How long did that run for? Why is that no longer available? Where are we at with that?
So back in 2013, Malta was one of two countries that offered an investor pathway to citizenship, the other one being Cyprus, which we were very active with as well. So at the time, the option was naturalize in just under 2 years, either by investing 5 million into a portfolio of properties in Cyprus, or make a donation to a state fund that was dedicated to the national development and economic development of Malta. And that was in the amount of just under €1 million. So you had a mix of preferences. Some people preferred to invest in real estate. Others, wanted a much smaller capital outlay, and therefore preferred the donation option. The end result was, of course, the passing through a due diligence process where Malta survived international scrutiny. Cyprus closed its program back in 2020, largely because of maybe at least a perceived lack of strong safeguards and due diligence processes. Malta had a very strong due diligence process, so it kept going until 2025. Now, in 2025, April marked a very important point in our work with clients at a time when we were already quite inundated with American applicants seeking citizenship and finding ways to contribute to Malta. When the European Court basically decided to, so back in April 2025, the European Court issued its decision in the case of the European Commission, so the executive body of the European Union, versus Malta. So Malta was at the center of this controversy, having insisted that it was within its rights to issue its citizenship and allow the acquisition of citizenship on its terms as a sovereign nation that under European law was allowed to do so. And at the time, we had already kind of obtained a lot of encouragement from the European Court's own legal counsel, the Advocate General, who had already ruled in Malta's favor. So his advice to the court was that Malta was satisfying the European law. I think that we got a big surprise that in April, the court decided against Malta. And I think it looked at substance over form. So it said, look, maybe the law does follow European standards, but commercially out there, in the international markets, we can see many adverts where citizenship of Malta is being sold for money with this salesy perception that with very little presence, you're able to get Maltese citizenship. And therefore, it is against the spirit of the European law. So Malta, I've written extensively on why I think the legal basis is very flawed, despite my agreeing with the outcome. So I do agree with the outcome and the reason behind the outcome, but yeah, the legal basis was a bit flawed. But that's beside the point. Ultimately, the European Court is a supranational court, and there's no way to overturn that. And I think Malta took a very practical approach there. So that we bowed our heads to those recommendations. To leave no doubt that Malta was compliant with European law, it actually terminated its citizenship by investment program.
Okay.
What I've described earlier about this kind of merit-based pathway to citizenship in recognition for contributions stems of an entirely different law that is very clear that it requires an exceptional contribution where you're no longer paying anything to the government, so it's not a transaction. You're not assured anything. It's not an automatic process. But on the other hand, in balance, the government is making it clear that it is welcoming people who are willing to participate actively in the development of Malta 2.0, kind of. So Malta is taking it to the next level. And therefore, So unlike the citizenship by merit frameworks you find in other European countries, rather than requiring you to show a track record over the last 15 years of how you've helped the country, Malta allows you to come completely new to Malta. Yes, first establish your residency. So there's a formality of applying for residency and complying with some due diligence aspects at that stage. But then to discuss with us, brainstorm with us ways in which your credentials, your achievements in the past can be translated into a project of national interest. And you would be surprised. Our clients are so excited that they're not just being told where to pay. Now they're given the opportunity to brainstorm ideas, come up with even plans they had, dreams they had of how they could give back, and come to a country that wants them. So Malta is a country that really is open to their ideas. Yes, there is this high standard of national interest. So what you're proposing can't be something that any business would do for profit or something that already is being done in Malta. But there's a list of industries and a whole document that outlines Malta's Vision 2050. And therefore, you would need to align with one of those industries and obtain the endorsement of some public body to confirm that what you're proposing is of national interest. And of course, we have to play a very important role there to facilitate that, to help clients familiarize with what is really needed here, what's really valuable for Malta, to kind of channel their energies and their financial resources in the right place.
So for the audience at home, the citizenship by merit, if you look at the June 10th, 2026 podcast with Nadine Anderson, we talked about that with Austria. It's a very, very interesting topic. It's in a lot of other countries, not just Malta. I think Dr. Jean-Philippe illustrated that. So for those that maybe want to learn a little bit more, go listen to the podcast with Nadine. Okay, let's get into the nuts and bolts of why I think people are here. Let's talk about the specific details of the residency by investment program. Give me, as the kids say these days, give me all the deets. How much does it cost? What's the timeline? Do I have to live in Malta? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Give me all the commitments that I have to, the boxes I have to check to get into this program.
Lovely. So firstly, residency takes different shapes and forms according to your individual profile. So if you're a retiree or an entrepreneur or a nomad digital worker, even if you're a pensioner, specifically having worked in the UN, there are specific programs dedicated to you that give you both residency and special tax status. And this special tax status means usually a flat rate of tax, so that there is a tax advantage in receiving that income. To be clear, the residency pathway as part of the citizenship by merit is only available to people that are proposing to develop a project or some way of exceptionally contributing to Malta as a means to obtain citizenship. Okay. Then you could actually, so when we speak of residency by investment, we're often referring to something entirely separate, which is a goal in itself, the permanent residency program. So the permanent residency program of Malta is one of the residency by investment programs available here, which has the effect of giving you residency for life. So in terms of timeline, what that involves is, first of all, this applies to 4 generations of the family. Okay, wow. So the main applicant and spouse, parents of both sides, grandparents of both sides of the family, if still alive, as well as kids up to the age of 28, as long as they are unmarried and financially dependent on the parents at the time of application. So there you are. So one family application can include up to 4 generations. We actually speak of 5 generations because this can then be passed on to the spouses of the kids once the kids get married, and to the kids. So if they have babies, they can be added on at a minor cost without having to apply and qualify separately. So it goes kind of quite beyond the standard family definition in many other countries. In fact, this permanent residency is different to some other European permanent residencies in that it is not a conditional permanent residency. In my mind, it's either permanent or conditional. So some permanent residencies in other European countries are conditional to you keeping an investment or a property, which means the moment you sell the property or divest of the investment, you're losing your resident status. In Malta, once you get your permanent residency within about 8 months, it's for life. You do not need to apply again. You don't need to renew. Yes, residency cards in general are all renewable every 5 years, but there's no process of reapplying or proving again and things like that. So when it comes to cost, the cost of permanent residency isn't to the level that we spoke about for citizenship by investment, where you need to show some project or impact of national interest. Here we're talking about a total cost of around 120,000 euros for the whole family, professional fees included, but mostly this covers government fees, okay, over the period of 8 to 9 months until you receive your approval. The bulk of this is payable at the end upon approval. And again, this is a difference from other residency programs you find around the world, where many times you need to make the investment first, then you have to wait, and there's no incentive of any government agency to give you the outcome because you've already done your investment. Whereas in Malta, we're a bit more commercially minded, and we give you your residency, and then you make the investment.
Wow.
So that's permanent residency. It does not require any physical presence during the application stage. And because it's also designed as a Plan B solution, it doesn't require any minimum presence. So some countries like Portugal requires 7 days every year. Malta doesn't require any physical presence. And as a result, it also doesn't cause you to become automatically a tax resident of Malta. And therefore, we can safely say that permanent residency in its own right is tax neutral. So it doesn't create a new tax obligation, doesn't change your tax status, it doesn't make you a tax resident.
Do they have to do a background check or biometrics or source of funds or any of that kind of stuff?
One thing Malta has in common in all its investor or entrepreneur or merit-based immigration programs is that Malta is very careful not to allow the wrong kind of people to obtain residency or citizenship. And it's, I would say, the reason why Malta has been allowed to continue offering these pathways to what effectively isn't just Maltese residency or citizenship, but it's also access to the whole of Europe. It's because Malta has been trusted to actually conduct due diligence background checks, source of wealth checks at international standards. Okay. So that does require you to disclose assets and explain how you've built your current asset base to show that this is all legal.
And what kind of documentation would be required? So if someone wants to understand how I came to my net worth, like how would I prove that, or what would you use for evidence of how that was
accumulated? It could be a mix of pay slips, if it's largely salary based, if it's derived from an inheritance, a copy of the will, if it's a divorce award, a copy of that, if it's the sale of certain assets, maybe copies of that. Sometimes we have clients that have a very publicly verifiable liquidity event, like the sale of a business, and that there we would be able to obtain that information without bothering them too much.
And your firm puts all that together for the application for the clients?
That's right. So we would cover all legal, immigration, and tax aspects of the process. So anything associated with getting this end result of residency or citizenship, including drafting of wills, if appropriate, registering them for tax and filing their even nil tax returns or other tax returns, that's all covered in-house.
Okay. Are there any other commitments that we didn't mention or talk about that the audience should be aware of when applying for this program or getting into this program?
So one of the tests that you need to apply for permanent residency is also the wealth test or means test. Okay. Generally speaking, the idea is to make sure that you are kind of financially self-sufficient. So there's a requirement to show that you have at least 650,000 euros in worldwide assets in any form, whether real estate, investment portfolio, bank deposits, of which 150 needs to be liquid. There are different variations of this rule because we have clients who are maybe bigger but less liquid or smaller but more liquid, so it is quite flexible.
And do you count cryptocurrency as liquid or illiquid?
Mostly liquid.
Okay, got it. All right. And what about like I would assume like if I were an owner of a small business, for example, the Wolf Group, that would probably be considered illiquid. It probably wouldn't count towards the liquid portion of the tax.
Private equity is probably considered illiquid.
Illiquid. Okay, got it. All right. Let's talk about the tax, because you mentioned this earlier about the non-dom tax regime, which the UK is now, well, I guess they have a temporary non-dom regime for folks coming inbound now, but they've pretty much done away, there's some big changes in the UK. Tell us about the tax regime in Malta, specifically about the non-dom tax regime. How does, when you're talking to people that are, say, highly compensated, what's your, what are you telling those folks? And I think you mentioned this about retirees. The Wolf Group, a lot of our clients are, and I believe you mentioned United Nations, but IMF, World Bank, they live off their pension. And one of the reasons why a lot of those folks like to go to Portugal, or did like to go to Portugal, because Portugal had that 10% tax on foreign pensions. Talk to us about what, when you see these two different types of individuals coming across, and they're actually saying, look, I'm going to become a tax resident of Malta. I'm going to live there. I'm not just going to do the residency by investment program. I want to understand when I'm there. I'm going to use it as a base to travel to other places, the conduit, as you say. But what am I looking at from a tax perspective?
Sure. So when we speak of retirees or pensioners or nomads, also these are different categories for which Malta's tax code, we can call it so, offers these special tax rates. Mm-hmm. However, there's this foundational principle: the res non-dom applies across the board. So the res non-dom tax system firstly requires you to self-classify as resident or non-resident. We do help clients self-classify, to understand based on their criteria. The simple way of classifying is to run the 6-month rule or test, which is quite straightforward. So if you did spend more than 6 months in any given tax year, and which is also the calendar year in Malta, that makes you resident for tax purposes automatically. But then you could qualify, or you could be considered resident for tax purposes if you enter Malta with an intention to establish your residency, even if you've spent way under the 6 months. That gives you planning opportunities. So we have clients who are spending less than 6 months and absolutely don't want to establish another tax residency in Malta. And we would guide them how to avoid that. But others might actually not spend 6 months anywhere else. So the 3 months maybe, or one even less, that they might spend in Malta might be sufficient for them to elect for Malta and I'll explain the tax benefits of doing that, to elect for Malta to be their main tax residency. And then they're spending maybe 3 months somewhere else, another 4 months there, and so on. As we said, Malta is often a conduit or a hub when maybe clients have an increasingly mobile life where they're spending time in maybe 4 months in Italy, maybe in the south of France, maybe in the US, maybe in Dubai, and so on. So once you're in that position, you're probably not spending 6 months a year in any one country. That gives you the ability to choose Malta, elect for Malta, and of course there's planning around it, and there are steps to take to ensure you solidify your, to prove this intention to establish Malta as your residence. And that makes you a res non-dom. So what res non-dom means essentially is resident, but not domiciled. Domiciled means, to simplify, maybe oversimplify, is you're not born in Malta, you're a foreigner, therefore you're non-dom, and it's relatively hard to even accidentally acquire domicile in Malta, and therefore you can safely say that you're always enjoying this privilege of non-dom. Residency is this dual test, either if you spend 6 months or if you enter Malta with an intention to reside. Now, if you qualify as a res non-dom, you're only subject to tax on income arising in Malta. So you might work in Malta, earn a salary, you might maybe receive rental income if you have a property that you rent out, and it's quite often done because there's a vibrant Airbnb market, for example. Any other income that you generate in Malta would be subject to tax in Malta as a resident. The tax rates, incidentally, are progressive tax rates with an exempt portion to start with, and then anything over 11,000 euros is taxed at progressive tax rates from 15% up to 35%, with 35% kicking in at about 60,000 euros.
Oh, wow. Okay.
However, many times this 35% is not applying because you don't have income arising in Malta, or maybe you have rental income, which is subject to a flat rate of 15% tax. So that's quite efficient. And then all the other income is arising outside Malta. And as long as you keep your income outside Malta, you don't remit the income, in accordance with also the old res non-dom rules in the UK. If you don't remit that income in Malta, it is not taxable, and therefore not reportable either. Now, where Malta is a bit different from the latest kind of res non-dom before its abolition, is that Malta has the classical res non-dom, where in its original form, capital gains, even foreign capital gains, whether remitted or otherwise, are even not subject to tax. So, and this is a great exit planning, capital gains planning possibility, where if you establish yourself in Malta, take up tax residency in Malta, before a major liquidity event, you can potentially tax plan in a way that in Malta that is not at all taxable, even if you receive the whole proceeds of the deal in Malta.
Wow.
So this res non-dom tax system is the foundation. This applies to everyone. You're either resident or not, and if you're resident, you're only subject to tax on local source income and foreign source capital gains only if remitted to Malta. Then on top of that, you build up the special tax rates, and these are completely elective. So you could just not elect for any of these special tax systems, and you're paying tax at progressive tax rates only on that taxable income, so that foreign income that you remit to Malta. Now, you would choose it if you planned to be retired here, and therefore you want to receive your pension here, also to avoid it being taxable at source. Then you'd need the income to be remitted here, and the special tax rate would be 15%. Okay? Now, of course, remember that anyone who is also a holder of a US passport or a green card is always subject to worldwide tax reporting and tax obligations. And of course, we're not advising on the US side, and we would leave that up to people like Mishkin. But this is very efficient, and we have many people coming even from, not only from America, but also from the UK, from Scandinavia, that actually find it cheaper to relocate for half of the year in Malta when it's colder and expensive to heat the homes back home, and to live in Malta where it's peak time all year round. So it's really active, even over the Christmas period. It's really nice to spend time in one of the islands.
So I want to touch on one thing that you mentioned about the US, and I want to ask it about Malta. So we're talking about worldwide taxation, worldwide informational reporting that the US imposes upon everybody. Still, it's the bane of my existence to have to file the report of foreign bank accounts, the FBAR and FATCA and all that stuff. If I'm a resident of Malta but non-dom, am I going to have to report my US bank accounts to the Maltese government or Maltese tax authorities? Is there informational reporting?
So first of all, Malta doesn't have any wealth tax, no property taxes, no inheritance taxes, no exit taxes. So it's quite nice. So that's quite a happy situation. As a result, there's no obligation also to report any assets. So in your tax return, you will only report income if it's taxable and capital gains if taxable. So in other words, there's no obligation to report overseas assets. Now, particularly in a res non-dom scenario, so I'm an American resident in Malta, retired in Malta, even more so there as a non-dom, there is no obligation to report any assets at all. There's no form or way to actually do it.
Okay. And if I set up a revocable trust in the United States, basically a foreign trust for Maltese tax purposes, is that going to create any problems in Malta? Any issues with that kind of?
Not at all. So anything held in a trust is deemed to be outside your estate.
Okay, got it. And then what about like a C corp or an S corp? The US LLC. Any issues?
Likewise.
Okay.
Incidentally, talking about trusts, we do have a number of American clients who set up foreign grantor trusts. I have colleagues who specialize in this space. And the idea there is to segregate assets in a way. So there are different uses of foreign grantor trusts managed in Malta for either US connected individuals who are not living in the US or expatriating US nationals. That's a completely different kind of area of expertise, which I have colleagues who handle. But there, one of the highlights is that a Maltese trust is Maltese by virtue of the location of the trustees. That's a service we offer through our trust company. But then there's the ability to choose the proper law, the actual trust law. So for many American lawyers who want to use a foreign trustee but apply familiar trust law like Cayman law, that's a possibility. So we have freedom of choice of law, essentially.
Can I apply Wyoming trust law or?
Well, a Malta trust can be run, as long as it's run by a Maltese trustee, it can be operating on any law of your choice.
Okay. Wow. I didn't know all that. That's super interesting. Okay. Well, in my understanding of what your firm does is that you guys have interacted with a lot of U.S. people that are interested in this program or the previous citizenship by investment program. You have a kind of a long-running track history with Americans coming inbound through Malta, that gateway, as you call it, which I think is a beautiful thing. Can you just give us, a little bit of your background on that? Like how long you've been dealing with Americans? How many clients? Oh, you have to tell us, or clients or whatever it is. But just
okay. Sure. No. Well, I think Malta's relationship with the US has been quite strong over the years. Mm-hmm. In fact, I joined the American Bar Association and the American Immigration Lawyers Association because there's a lot of interest in, and over the years there has been a lot of interest in Malta as a pathway to various countries. I'd say that the kind of mobility we have seen in the earlier years of our practice were more business oriented, or companies, and particularly American multinational companies, moving people around from to their offices in Europe. Increasingly, we are now seeing families themselves opting to emigrate or simply to put in place a plan B.
Right.
And this plan B can be plan B because of certain concerns, but it can also simply be a retirement plan.
Right.
And there's also this perception, which isn't so incorrect, that particularly citizenship pathways might not be here to stay. They tend to be selective, they tend to be restrictive. We've seen even citizenship by descent pathways in a number of European countries being restricted and becoming harder because there was a major flow, particularly of Americans seeking their roots to try to obtain, revive their European citizenships. So that puts Malta in a very rare situation. So far the government is very pro this kind of immigration because I don't think you can put any upper limit on this kind of individual. So we have people who come to us who are, captains of their industry, people who are, technologists. Specifically, our citizenship by merit law identifies philanthropists, technologists, entrepreneurs, investors, as well as artists, performers, and so on, as the target audience for recognition for any exceptional contribution they make to Malta. So I doubt you could ever put an upper cap. It's not like they're a burden on our society, quite the contrary. And hence Malta's approach to being very, very proactive in this space.
Absolutely. It sounds amazing. So if someone wants to get in touch with you, so if someone says, look, I'm interested in Malta, I'm thinking about doing this program or something within your wheelhouse, how do they get in contact with you? What does that look like? Do you do discovery calls, consultations? What's the process?
So first of all, we can be reached through email, through our website. I publish my own mobile number, so WhatsApp is often a good pathway as well. We have the luxury of, being a private client-focused firm. We have the luxury of spending time with our clients and enjoying it. So I am personally it's not something I would pass down. I enjoy the first call, which is a complimentary call where we discover and discuss what the objectives are. Sometimes there are lots of assumptions that lead to the wrong decisions. So people might approach us thinking, I want this, and then they realize that there are even better options or better pathways to achieve those objectives. So we're often advising across Europe when it comes particularly to res non-dom regimes or preferential tax regimes, and we're combining the tax advice with the various immigration options that many European countries offer. And we've got the luxury of being in this country, Malta, that is often not just a destination, but as I said, the conduit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, you've got me sold. You may be seeing me ask for a discovery call for me and my family sometime in the near future. Dr. Jean-Philippe, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was truly a pleasure to hear everything about Malta and your firm and yourself. Hopefully we can get you back on the podcast in the near future and give us another update. Should something change or be different with what's going on in Malta.
The pleasure is mine, Mishkin. Thank you.
You've been tuning in to the Essential Tax Podcast with your host, Mishkin Santa. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcast, Spotify, and on our website, thewolfgroup.com. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others.